firefighter rushes into a burning cabin, only to find a baby, abandoned and barely breathing, in the center of the flames. Why would someone leave a child to die like that? And what his retired K9 does next will leave you speechless. Comment below. Do you believe dogs remember the people they once loved? And if you believe in second chances and the power of loyalty, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts and heals.
The wind rolled in heavy over Clay Ridge, Montana, that night, an icy, whispering thing that rattled shutters and carried the bitter scent of pine smoke through snow-thickened air. The small mountain town sat cloaked beneath a fresh coat of white, the kind of silence that felt more like holding one's breath in peace. Street lamps glowed like frozen fireflies beneath the falling snow, casting long, unmoving shadows across the hills. At the edge of town, where the pines grew taller and the houses lonelier, a sudden orange pulse broke the white monotony. A fire, violent and alive, licked at the sky from the roof of a weather-worn log cabin. Within seconds, sirens shattered the quiet. Luke Harrington was the first to arrive. Luke, 58, was a broad-shouldered man with thick gray stubble and deep-set eyes the color of ash. His skin bore the leathery tone of years spent beneath sun and smoke. He wore his heavy yellow bunker gear like a second skin, creased, worn, and soot-stained. A long scar traced the edge of his right wrist, half hidden by his glove, the remnant of a rescue gone wrong over a decade ago. Since his wife's death from cancer 5 years earlier, Luke had become quieter, more measured. He spoke sparingly but moved with calm purpose, like a man who had already lived through the worst and didn't flinch easily. Beside him, leaping from the cab of the engine before the wheels had even stopped turning, was Bruno. Bruno was a 7-year-old German Shepherd, once a decorated K9 search and rescue dog. His sable black and tan coat was now peppered with silver along the muzzle and legs, and a faint limp haunted his left hind leg, a torn ligament from a fall during a flood rescue. He wore no vest, no harness now, just a plain collar and the silent authority of a creature that had seen more chaos than most men. His amber eyes scanned the smoke without panic, just sharp, deliberate focus. Luke crouched beside him, hand steady on the dog's back. "Find them, boy." Bruno's ears perked, and without hesitation, he bolted toward the cabin, paws cutting across snow, smoke curling around him as if even the fire parted to let him pass. Flames roared through the windows. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, casting plumes of ember into the air. Luke followed Bruno, coughing as he pressed through the main door, already weakened by heat. Inside, the air was dense, black and stifling. Furniture burned in crackling heaps. A beam creaked overhead. Somewhere in the haze, Bruno barked once, then again, more urgent. Luke charged forward. He found Bruno near the far corner of the house, next to a scorched crib, half sunk into the collapsed floor. Amid soot and ash, a small figure lay motionless, wrapped in a tattered blanket. A baby. Luke's heart kicked against his ribs. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees, pulled off a glove, and touched the infant's cheek. Ice cold, blue-lipped, not breathing, or so he thought, until he saw it, the faintest flicker of the chest. "Jesus," Luke whispered, scooping the child into his arms. The baby was light, terrifyingly light. Bruno stood at his side, tail low, ears pressed back, guarding the space like it mattered more than anything else in the world. "We're not leaving him," Luke muttered, more to himself than the dog. Behind them, the structure groaned, a dreadful sound that always came right before collapse. Luke pivoted, cradling the infant against his chest as he ran. Fire gnawed at the edges of the walls. Bruno stayed close, navigating the path they'd come like he had memorized it, like the smoke meant nothing. They burst through the front door just as the far wall caved in, sending a geyser of ash into the night. Luke staggered toward the waiting fire truck, handed the baby off to a medic already rushing with thermal wraps and oxygen. His breath steamed into the frozen air, chest heaving. Bruno sat beside him, eyes fixed on the child, unmoving. From behind, the second storyline in Clay Ridge unfolded. Deputy Clara Hopkins arrived in a black and white cruiser, parking near the cordoned edge of the fire. 28 and sharp-eyed, Clara had the compact build of someone who grew up working ranches, short, sturdy, and strong. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a low, neat bun under her sheriff's department beanie. Her face, though youthful, was marked by a wary intelligence, born not from cynicism, but from having grown up around broken promises and people who didn't come home. She flashed her badge to the fire captain and moved past the barrier. Clara had been investigating the disappearance of a young woman named Rachel Monroe, missing for over a week. No calls, no signs, just gone. The last known address? This very cabin. As medics tended to the infant, Clara approached Luke. "You pulled them out?" she asked, her voice firm but soft around the edges. Luke nodded, still catching his breath. "Didn't see anyone else inside." "No sign of the mother?" "No." Clara's eyes darkened. She might not have left voluntarily. Luke glanced at the smoking ruins. "This place didn't burn like an accident." "Exactly," Clara muttered, already pulling gloves on as she stepped around the perimeter. Her instincts, finely honed from years of reading the quiet, were buzzing. This wasn't just arson. This was a cover-up. Behind them, the baby let out a whimper. Alive. The wind outside Clay Ridge General Hospital moaned low across the icy parking lot, brushing snow in thin ribbons over the pavement. The building stood quiet against the gray morning, its windows frosted, its waiting room hushed. Inside, in a corner of the pediatric wing warmed by soft yellow lights and the steady beeping of monitors, the baby lay swaddled in thermal blankets, his small body dwarfed by the hospital crib. Nurses had given him a name, Hope. It was temporary, they said, until someone came forward. But to Luke Harrington, watching from the doorway with heavy eyes, the name clung like something deeper. Luke sat beside the crib, one hand resting on the raised plastic rail. He had showered, but the scent of smoke still lingered in his skin. He hadn't slept. The baby's shallow breathing was better now, less ragged, but his skin remained pale, his eyelids bruised. A nurse had said he was lucky. Luke wasn't so sure. There was something too quiet about a baby who didn't cry. He looked at the child's face and saw someone else. A memory. Years ago, his wife Emily had lost their only child to a late miscarriage. They had named him Jacob, held him for minutes that felt like lifetimes. Luke had carried that weight in his chest ever since, hidden behind fireproof gear and silence. But sitting here, watching this newborn fight for breath, stirred something buried so deep he almost didn't recognize it. A longing, a guilt. Across the hall, Bruno lay curled on a folded blanket brought in by one of the nurses, an older woman named Beverly, who had a soft spot for dogs. Bruno's hind leg was wrapped and treated, the vet having come by to check for heat-related injuries. The big German shepherd wasn't whining or restless, but he hadn't slept. He kept lifting his nose to the air, as if tracking something distant. Luke glanced toward him. "You smell something I don't." Bruno didn't react, but his ears tilted slightly. At that moment, the door creaked open and Clara Hopkins stepped in, her boots still caked with slush and ash. She wore a dark parka over her uniform and carried a file folder in one hand. Her cheeks were wind-bitten, but her eyes were sharp and restless. "I've got something," she said, not wasting breath. "You want to see it?" Luke followed her down to the temporary incident room set up at the local sheriff's office annex, a small brick building near downtown. Inside, pinned to the corkboard, were photos from the burned cabin, most charred or half-melted, but still legible to trained eyes. Clara pointed to one in particular, a scorched corner of what once had been a family photograph. Only half remained, showing a woman with chestnut hair and a faint smile, holding an infant. The rest was consumed by flame, but someone, Clara wasn't sure who, had tucked it behind a baseboard. Intentional, as if they wanted it found. "There's more," Clara added. She pulled a plastic evidence bag from a drawer. Inside was a frayed piece of rope, burned on one end. Found it under the floorboards, along with blood. Dried. Dark. Not from the baby. Luke's jaw set. "So someone was tied up?" "Looks like it. And that wasn't a nursery. That room had a padlock outside. They exchanged a look, unspoken thoughts crackling between them like dry branches. This wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate, controlled. While Clara continued reviewing the evidence, Bruno had been taken out for a short walk behind the station. The one handling him was Deputy Ronnie Mayverse, a kind, middle-aged officer with more heart than tact. Tall, round in the belly, and always smelling faintly of coffee and menthol, Ronnie was good with animals, though not particularly observant. As they rounded the side of the building, Bruno suddenly stopped. His nose lifted. Then he pulled hard to the left, toward the tree line near a walking trail that ran north. Ronnie tried to hold him back, but Bruno's low growl told him not to bother. The dog wasn't aggressive. He was focused, intently. Ronnie radioed Clara, who came out within minutes. "What is it, boy?" she asked, crouching beside him. Bruno's tail was stiff, nose twitching. He looked up at Clara, then back toward the trees. Then he walked. They followed. Just past the trailhead, a small path veered off into thicker brush. Snow had melted here and refrozen, making it slick. About 200 feet in, Clara noticed it, scratches along the bark of an old birch tree, spaced like fingernail scrapes. Nearby, a piece of fabric fluttered, half buried in ice. She picked it up, thin cotton, pink with a faded floral print. She bagged it, then looked around. The forest seemed to breathe. Cold, patient, watching. "Luke needs to see this," she said softly. Back at the hospital, Luke had just finished speaking to Dr. Evelyn Hart, the attending pediatrician. Dr. Hart was in her late 40s, sharp-featured but warm, with short dark hair and rectangular glasses that framed tired eyes. She had worked in Clay Ridge for almost 2 decades and had seen her share of tragedies. But even she looked shaken. "This baby was starved," she said. "Not for hours. For days. No formula. Just water, maybe, and signs of cold exposure consistent with overnight exposure." "You said the fire was deliberate?" Luke nodded. She sighed. "He's lucky to be alive. But someone wanted him dead." Luke's fist clenched around the blanket edge. His instincts burned hotter than any fire. Clara arrived minutes later, frost still clinging to her sleeves. "We've got a trail," she said. "North Side Woods." Bruno found it. "He's retired," Luke muttered. "He doesn't know that." Luke gave her a look, half admiration, half concern. "Then let's follow it." The trees loomed tall and motionless in the northern woods, their snow-draped limbs still as tombstones in the silence of the early afternoon. The trail Bruno had followed now ended near the edge of a frozen creek, where brush and frostbitten ferns crowded a clearing no wider than a single-room cabin. Here the wind stilled. Here the air shifted. Deputy Clara Hopkins moved slowly through the undergrowth, her boots crunching thin patches of ice. She held her breath as she reached the thicket's edge. There, just beyond a row of low pine saplings, she saw her. A woman, barefoot, clothes torn at the hem, huddled beneath a blue tarp fastened between 2 trees. Her hair was matted and unkempt, a dark chestnut tangled with twigs. Her face, though streaked with dirt, was striking in its stillness. High cheekbones, narrow nose, pale lips. She sat curled in on herself, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her eyes, green, bloodshot, and unfocused, watched Clara with the wary gaze of a feral creature. Clara raised her hands gently. "I'm with the sheriff's department. You're safe now." The woman blinked but didn't speak. Her breath fogged in the air. Around her, an empty thermos and a half-eaten protein bar sat on the ground, left by someone perhaps recently. Bruno stood behind Clara, unusually calm. As they stepped closer, the big German shepherd moved ahead, approaching the woman slowly. "No grol, no tensión," just an almost reverent quiet. He stopped within 2 feet of her and sat, lowering his head slightly. The woman looked down at him. Then, trembling, she extended a shaking hand and touched the fur between his ears. Bruno leaned into her touch with a gentle sigh. "She knows you," Clara murmured. The woman whispered something barely audible. Clara crouched closer. "What's your name?" Another whisper. A pause. Then, "Rachel. Rachel Monroe." Clara helped her to her feet, offering a blanket and radioing Luke to bring the cruiser around the service road. Rachel staggered once, leaning into Claire's arm. Her wrists were raw, and on her right one, a faded scar formed a perfect loop. A binding mark. They brought her to the clinic wing of Clay Ridge General, where she was treated for dehydration, minor frostbite, and signs of recent blunt force trauma to the temple, consistent with a fall or a blow. While doctors worked, Luke watched through the glass. "She's the one," Clara said quietly beside him. "The mother." Luke didn't respond at first. His gaze was distant, flickering between Rachel and the image still etched in his mind. Hope, lying in that crib surrounded by smoke. Later, as evening settled, he returned to the hospital nursery. The baby was asleep. Luke gently shifted the blanket and looked at the infant's chest. There was again that small brown mole just above the ribcage, a spot his wife used to say she hoped their son would have. When she miscarried, they never had a chance to find out. But now, was it grief that made the resemblance feel real? Or was something else unraveling beneath the surface? Across the hallway, Dr. Evelyn Hart approached with Rachel's updated file. Memory loss due to trauma. Could be days, could be weeks before it all comes back. But she knew the baby. When I showed her his photo, she started crying. She said, "Anything else?" She asked if his name was Noah, then shut down again. Didn't speak for a full hour. Luke stared at the crib. "Noah," he repeated under his breath. Meanwhile, Bruno had refused to leave the hospital. Anytime someone tried to lead him out, he would circle back and lie near the door to Rachel's room. And when she was moved into a recovery bed, he laid beside it, silent, steady. Nurses began to joke that he was more reliable than the monitors. Clara returned later that night with someone new, a woman in her early 60s, wearing a thick wool coat and leather gloves, her snow-dusted curls tied back in a clip. Her name was Marla Jennings, a social worker from the County Child Protection Office. She had a warm but formal tone and eyes that missed little. "We'll need DNA to confirm maternity," she said after reviewing the file. "But for now, she's under observation, and the child remains under temporary care. If they match, we'll assess reunification." "DNA?" Luke asked. "You can't just go on recognition." Marla gave a kind but cautious smile. "Recognition's not enough in court. Paperwork is. And right now, the boy's still a John Doe." Rachel stirred when she heard Marla's voice. Her gaze flicked to Bruno, then to Luke. "He's mine, isn't he?" Her voice was raspy but stronger now. "I remember the smell of smoke. And someone yelling. You were in the fire," Luke said gently. "We pulled him out. You were found nearby." She looked down at her hands. "I tied that ribbon on his wrist before everything went black." Luke blinked. "Ribbon?" He left the room, hurried to the baby's crib, and checked under the blanket. There, barely visible now, was a tiny knotted strip of cloth around Hope's wrist, smudged with soot, pink and faded. Snow flurries danced under the glow of the hospital parking lot lights as evening set in across Clay Ridge. Inside room 208, the warmth of recovery clashed with memories too jagged to stay buried. Rachel Monroe sat upright on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling slightly despite the wool blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her green eyes, clearer now, held the weight of what she had begun to remember. The silence in the room felt heavy, bracing itself for the truth. Luke Harrington stood nearby, his arms crossed, jaw clenched. Though his bulk filled the corner of the room, he didn't speak. Clara Hopkins was seated beside Rachel, notepad in hand, her voice calm but firm. The fluorescent lighting cast soft shadows across their faces, lending the room the stillness of a confession chamber. Rachel exhaled shakily. His name was Grant. Grant Ryland. Clara's pen paused. "Can you tell us what happened?" Rachel nodded slowly. "He said he loved me. At first. I didn't know how I ended up with him. It's blurry, but I remember being taken. I remember that cabin. He kept me there. Locked. I couldn't scream, not without punishment." She pulled back her sleeve to show the faint white scar across her forearm. "He controlled everything. My food, my movement. He said no one would believe me if I escaped. That no one even remembered me." Luke's voice was low. "How long were you there?" "Months," she said. "Maybe longer. I don't know. It was after Noah was born that things changed. He got paranoid. Talked about starting over, erasing everything. Said fire was cleaner than bullets. Clara's expression tightened. He tried to burn the place with you and the baby inside. Rachel nodded again. He gave me sleeping pills. Said we'd go peacefully. I spat them out when he left. I wrapped Noah and ran, but I must have slipped. I remember the snow and pain, then darkness. Clara looked toward Luke. Grant Ryland. That name ring any bells? Luke didn't answer at first. Then he was one of mine. The room froze. He joined our crew 6 years ago. Seemed like the quiet type, a little intense, sure, but reliable. He worked 3 rotations, then things started going off. He'd show up late, or not at all. There were complaints, aggressive outbursts, disrespect to superiors. He threatened another firefighter after a training accident. That's when I cut him loose. Was he evaluated? Clara asked. He refused. Quit before we could escalate it. Rachel stared down at her hands. He knew your name, Luke. Talked about you like he hated you. Said you took something from him. Luke's brow furrowed, then darkened with realization. Bruno. Rachel glanced toward the doorway, where Bruno lay dozing near the foot of her bed. He said I didn't deserve him, Luke muttered. But Bruno didn't listen to him anymore. He came to me willingly. Wouldn't leave the truck. Clara looked up sharply. I need to see something. Back at the sheriff's office later that night, Clara sat at her desk reviewing Archive K-9 assignment files. She sifted through training logs, adoption records, and deployment reports until she found it. Bruno, assigned to Grant Ryland, Unit 17, retired, early, cause unspecified. Handler reassigned, L. Harrington, but the file had inconsistencies. Pages out of order. Signatures overwritten. And most notably, a forged behavioral report marked aggressive tendencies, contradicting Bruno's exemplary field record. Someone had tried to bury the truth. She stormed into Luke's office, the folder in hand. This was covered up. Someone falsified Bruno's file to justify separating him from Grant. It wasn't protocol. It was personal. Luke looked up from his desk, face grim. I did it. Clara blinked. You. I lied. I pulled strings. Grant was hurting him, training him to attack without command. I saw the bruises on Bruno's ribs after a drill, the way he flinched around sudden noises. So I filed the paperwork to pull him out, made sure Grant couldn't get him back. Clara paced. You did the right thing. But if Grant blames you for that, he won't stop. I know. Meanwhile, Rachel remained under protective care. The hospital moved her to a quieter wing. Noah, still recovering, was now strong enough to be held longer, fed properly. The sight of Rachel cradling him, whispering his name through silent tears, had become a symbol of defiance inside those halls, of something stolen being reclaimed. But Bruno's behavior had shifted. He paced more, stood guard at windows, whined when shadows passed outside. One night, around 2 a.m., Nurse Susan, an older woman with a silver bun and a calm demeanor, was startled when Bruno growled softly at the corner of the room. When she turned, no one was there, but the hairs on her arms stood. Back in town, Luke returned to the station to review their department's tool inventory. As he compared recent logs, he noticed something odd. Gear had gone missing over the last 3 weeks. Not enough to raise flags individually, but together? 3 respirator masks, a thermal imaging camera, 2 sets of turnout gear, and the signatures authorizing those withdrawals? Forged. Damn it, he hissed. He called Clara. Grant's still around. He's prepping for something. The air had turned razor-sharp by midnight, slicing through Clay Ridge with wind that howled across the valley like a beast disturbed. Snow fell fast and thick again, disguising tracks, muffling sound. In the woods north of town, barely visible through the trees, a pale light flickered, unnatural, sputtering. Fire. Rachel Monroe's scream was swallowed by the storm. Inside a small hunting shack, long abandoned, half-rotted, and shielded beneath towering evergreens, she stood bound at the wrists, mouth gagged, eyes wide with terror. Her captor moved around the room in sharp, efficient gestures, pouring gasoline in arcs, his breath hissing through clenched teeth. Grant Ryland's face was pale beneath layers of soot, his eyes sunken but wild with purpose. He wore an old firefighter's turnout coat, stolen, mismatched, darkened with smoke. He was tall, with wiry limbs and close-cropped graying hair. His expression wasn't rage. It was conviction, the kind of blind certainty that made his voice eerily calm as he spoke. I told them I'd burn it all down if they didn't listen. You, the boy, that mutt, and Harrington, always playing hero while pretending he's clean. He turned toward her, cocking his head slightly. You ruined the purity, Rachel. You let him name the child. You forgot what we were building. Rachel struggled against the ropes, her eyes full of fury, not fear. The baby, Noah, whom she had whispered Eden to in a stolen moment of clarity, lay bundled in a corner cradle, whimpering quietly, the only sound that pierced the storm's howl. Meanwhile, Luke Harrington stood beside Clara at the edge of a remote trail. Bruno paced beside him, his heavy paws sinking into fresh snow, muzzle lifted. The dog had gone rigid minutes earlier, nose twitching, body straining towards something deeper in the woods. Then the wind shifted, and both Luke and Clara smelled it. Gasoline. They ran. Bruno surged ahead, faster than Luke had seen him in months. His aging limbs powered forward with a strength that should not have been possible. Clara followed close behind, flashlights swinging wildly. The flames had begun licking the edges of the shack when they saw it, a thin column of black smoke rising beyond the next ridge. Luke didn't hesitate. He smashed through the door with one boot, the wooden frame splintering. Heat burst against his face. Inside, smoke curled like angry snakes. Through the haze, he saw Rachel tied to a wooden chair, the baby still in the corner, coughing weakly. Grant was turning toward him with a lighter in his hand and madness behind his eyes. Luke lunged. They collided, grappling violently. Grant fought with desperation, arms flailing with raw strength. Luke blocked a strike, then delivered a punch that sent Grant reeling backward, but not before the lighter flew, igniting a curtain of gasoline-soaked tarp. Fire roared. Clara rushed in behind, grabbing Rachel's ropes and sawing them loose with a pocket knife. "Got you," she murmured. "Hold on." Bruno, without waiting, dashed through the flames. His thick fur smoldered as he reached the baby's cradle. Gently, he took the blanket's edge in his mouth and pulled. The cradle toppled, the baby rolling into his paws. Bruno grasped the blanket, dragging the bundle toward the door. The fire closed in. Luke caught sight of Bruno through the smoke and staggered forward, coughing. He reached the threshold just in time to see the dog stumble out of the fire's edge, the baby held tight beneath him. His fur was scorched, a patch near his back leg blackened and raw. But his eyes stayed steady as he laid the child at Luke's feet, then collapsed. Bruno, Luke dropped to his knees, scooping the baby into his arms and calling out, "Clara, I've got Rachel," she shouted, guiding the dazed woman toward them. Behind them, the shack began to fold in on itself with a terrible groan. Flames devoured the beams. Grant lay motionless inside, pinned under fallen wood, his face finally empty of everything. By dawn, the emergency team had set up a perimeter. Clara stood wrapped in a medic's thermal coat, her face grim but intact. Rachel sat in the back of an ambulance with Eden pressed tightly against her chest, murmuring his name like a song she was relearning. His eyes fluttered open once. Just once. Bruno lay on a stretcher wrapped in damp gauze, an oxygen mask secured awkwardly over his snout. His chest rose, but faintly. His once proud body now trembled with every breath. The vet, Dr. Alan Mercer, a lean man in his 50s with silver temples and gentle brown eyes, spoke softly to Luke as he placed a hand on the firefighter's shoulder. "It's bad," he said. "Smoke inhalation. D-burns. I'll do everything I can, but he's not young anymore." Luke sat beside Bruno, resting a hand gently on his flank. "I know," he whispered. "Just stay a little longer. You brought him out. You did what no one else could." That evening, in the quiet of the Clay Ridge Animal Care Center, the lights were dim. The room smelled of antiseptic and warm towels. Luke remained at Bruno's side. No one asked him to leave. Bruno's breaths were slow, each one carried with effort. His eyes fluttered open once, locked on Luke's, and in that look was everything. Loyalty, fatigue, peace. Luke bent closer, his voice breaking. "You saved him. You saved her. You saved all of us." He stayed like that until the soft rhythm of breath slowed, then stilled. The last of the snow had melted from Clayridge's rooftops by the time the wind changed. It came not as a storm or chill, but as a warm breath from the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine needles, thawing soil, and the first flowers clawing their way through the frost. April had arrived, and with it came something more fragile than spring: hope. At Clayridge General Hospital, sunlight poured in through the window of room 107, where baby Eden cooed softly in a bassinet wrapped in blue flannel, his cheeks rosy and his eyes alert. A month had passed since the fire in the woods. A month since chaos cracked open the shell of this quiet town and spilled every buried secret across its snow-covered streets. Rachel Monroe stood beside the bassinet, her once hollow face now fuller, radiant with renewed strength. Her long chestnut hair had been washed and loosely tied back. The hospital gown had been replaced with a donated cardigan, pale yellow, paired with jeans and soft wool socks. There was still an edge to her, a wariness earned, but her voice when she spoke to Eden was gentle, like a melody she'd carried through the dark and now sang back into the light. Marla Jennings, the social worker who had once entered the room with legal forms and polite detachment, now stood at the doorway with her usual trench coat and clipboard. Her short gray curls framed a face that had grown noticeably softer over the weeks. "We got the results," she said. "There's no doubt. He's yours. Biologically, legally, and emotionally," Rachel finished, smiling down at her son. "I didn't need the paperwork for that." Marla chuckled and nodded, checking boxes with a pen. "Still, the court likes paper. But you'll be listed as his mother on every document going forward. You're safe now. Both of you." Rachel turned, her eyes suddenly moist. "Thank you for not giving up." Marla looked at her a moment longer, then placed a soft hand on her shoulder. "Mothers like you don't need saving. Just reminding." Meanwhile, across town at the Clayridge Justice Center, a different kind of reckoning unfolded. Grant Ryland, now confined behind a bulletproof barrier in a holding cell, sat motionless, face gaunt and wrists shackled. The trial had yet to begin, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses, Rachel's statement, stolen gear, DNA from the fire site, and testimony from Luke Harrington himself. Even more chilling were the connections being made to older cases, cold files dating back over 5 years, all with the same patterns: missing women, isolated cabins, unexplained fires. Detective Wesley Thorne, a lean man in his mid-40s with a bald head, sharp cheekbones, and a voice like wet gravel, was brought in from the State Bureau to handle the expansion. He was methodical, dressed in clean dark suits, and always holding a worn leather notebook. He had spent the last 2 weeks combing through what he now believed to be the signature of a serial offender who had flown under radar thanks to his good boy firefighter history. "We'll get the rest," he told Clara one morning outside the station. "Ryland's not going anywhere." Clara stood in her standard duty jacket, hair tied tight beneath her cap, hands deep in her pockets. "Just make sure he never gets close to her again." Thorne gave her a nod of quiet understanding. "You did good, Deputy." She turned her head, squinting at the morning sun. "Not deputy anymore. Just got the call. Sheriff's office approved the promotion." "Well earned," he replied. Clara smiled faintly, but her voice stayed grounded. "I'm not leaving Clayridge." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Could have transferred. Better pay, warmer weather." "There's something bigger than the badge," she said. "It's watching a kid like Eden laugh after surviving hell. That's the only promotion I need." And laughter did return to the quiet hills. At the animal care center, the town's miracle had unfolded only days ago. Bruno, who had lain silent for 3 weeks, his heartbeat low, lungs ragged, suddenly lifted his head during a routine check. Nurse Beverly, the same older nurse with pink scrubs and a ponytail tied with a rubber band, had gasped, dropped her clipboard, and screamed so loudly that a janitor slipped on the tile outside. Luke Harrington was called immediately. He arrived in less than 5 minutes, still wearing his firehouse jacket. When he entered the recovery room, Bruno looked up, weak but alert, his amber eyes locking on Luke's face with recognition that silenced the room. Luke knelt beside him, cradled the dog's scarred head in his palm, and whispered, "You stubborn old hero." Bruno thumped his tail just once, but that was all anyone needed. 1 week later, in the backyard of Luke's cabin near the ridge, a new beginning quietly unfolded. The fencing had been repaired, the grass coaxed back into life. A picnic table stood in the sunlight, surrounded by old chairs and the scent of grilled venison from a smoker nearby. Rachel sat on a blanket with Eden in her lap, now crawling, reaching for wildflowers. Her expression was still cautious around large crowds, but today she laughed. It was a rusty sound at first, like an unused wind chime catching a breeze, but it grew stronger. Luke moved nearby, fixing a hinge on the gate, his hands stained with oil and grass. He wore a soft flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, and his usual stoic silence had eased into quiet peace. When he looked over at Rachel and Eden, it wasn't romantic longing in his eyes. It was something deeper: connection, redemption, a shared understanding that came not from attraction, but mutual survival. Bruno lay nearby in the shade of the porch, a large water bowl beside him and a new bandana around his neck, blue with the Clay Ridge Fire Department logo stitched into the corner. Children came up to pet him, and he endured their squeals and clumsy hugs with patient dignity. He had earned every one. Clara arrived last, in plain clothes for once, a denim jacket and worn jeans, hair down for the first time in months. She carried a tray of homemade muffins and a gift bag. "Is that banana nut?" Luke asked, nodding toward the tray. She grinned. Bruno's favorite. Bruno thumped his tail again. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and laughter echoed over the hills, Rachel looked toward the horizon, her arms wrapped around Eden, who had just fallen asleep against her chest. From behind her, Luke spoke softly. "You think he'll remember any of this?" Rachel shook her head. "No, but I'll remind him. Every day." Luke smiled. "Good." And with that, the town of Clay Ridge, scarred but healing, moved on. Not forgetting, but growing. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear badges or capes. They walk on four legs, wait quietly in hospital rooms, and carry our pain without words. This story reminds us that love doesn't always come with grand declarations. Sometimes it's found in quiet sacrifices, in second chances, and in the healing power of simply staying. In our daily lives, we often forget how much one small act of kindness, one moment of loyalty, or one hand reaching out can change everything. Maybe there's someone in your life, like Bruno, who stood by you when things were darkest. Don't forget to thank them. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below what this story meant to you. And if you believe in healing, in miracles, and in the silent strength of love, type amen in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that remind us what really matters.